case of State of Tennessee versus Roy Coons Jr., docket number 2017C-2159. What is your plea to the charges of first-degree murder, felony murder, attempted rape of a child, and especially aggravated murder? All right, thank you. Be seated. We will now move to opening statements, and after opening statements, we will end for the day.
You'll see pictures and you'll be able to see how one end of that trailer, if you think of a rectangle, the one at the short ends, is right up next to a tree line. And Ms. Valdez is very, very protective and cautious with her children. They went to a charter school, beautiful, warm, very close-knit church family. They attended a nearby church. It was mostly made up of people who were Hispanic, and they were a very, very close-knit family. The children had taken Taekwondo from a teacher near there. So basically, the children's lives existed at school, at church, and at home. And Ms. Valdez and her husband, Marlon Ortega, who you'll hear from also, they were very strict in one particular rule. You cannot go outside unless one of us is there watching. She did not want her children playing in the front of the lot. She didn't trust them, even though Johanna was 12 and Jocelyn was a little bit older than that. She still had concerns, and they weren't allowed to play outside. Patricia Valdez had to occasionally, but not all the time, leave the children alone. If there was something because of work that she had to go or an errand. And she had drilled into the children, you are not allowed to open the door for you. You are not to go to the door. If you hear somebody come to the door, you stand still and stop so no one will hear you walking in the trailer. August 10th of 2017 was the beginning of the new school year. Everybody's hopes were for the whole new year and they're ready to go. But a freak accident had happened a couple of days before, and Johanna had a fall when she was roller skating, and she sprained her ankle. It wasn't a break, but it was bad enough that she had to have an ace bandage, and she was having to wear crutches and use those to get around. The family had a boot that she couldn't keep it in. So on August the 10th, she had spoken to her mom and begged her and convinced her, Mom, I should be able to walk without crutches, in a day or so. Please, can I stay home from school because it's really hard to walk on these crutches. And her mom allowed her to. So in the morning of August the 10th, Oscar and Jocelyn get up and they get ready and they go off to school. Patricia Valdez is spending the morning she's there, and actually she and her daughter are texting back and forth on a new app that her daughter was teaching how to use, Google Hangout. It's kind of like a WhatsApp type of thing. And so they had been texting back and forth with each other. So it comes about midday, and it's time for Miss Valdez to go to her job at dry cleaners. And she leaves, and leaves her daughter there. The next time she saw her daughter, she was dead. Miss Valdez, while she was at work, had received a couple of text messages from her daughter. Those text messages were recovered forensically off of Ms. Valdez's phone, and you'll hear from an expert who can tell you what time those text messages came. They were approximately, I'm going on my memory, 5:15, 4:15, and 4:19 were the two texts. And Ms. Valdez didn't get to the text immediately, didn't see them, and didn't respond until much later. Ms. Valdez returns home, and she has Jocelyn with her to open the door to the trailer. And the way that the house is set up, Ms. Valdez's, her room is on one end of the corner of the trailer. It's the one closest to that tree line. And then on the other far end is the room where the two girls share. And then Oscar has his room. So when they enter in, they go inside, and Ms. Valdez, she turns to one direction to go to her room, and Jocelyn bebops down the hall to see her sister, Johanna. She comes running out of the room, screaming to her mother. Her mother goes to the room to check. Jocelyn goes and calls 911. Telling them that she believes her sister's dead and she's been raped. You will hear from Ms. Valdez about a mother's worst nightmare, and how when she walked into her daughter's room, her daughter was lying between the space between the bed and the closet, small little area, and she had a tight ponjota tied around her neck. Tied knots. And she had visible signs of bruising from the beating and pattern injuries. And her pants, they were her pajama pants, and her panties were pulled down below her knees, leaving her exposed. Ms. Valdez touches her and feels that she's cold. She gets on the phone with 911, and the 911 operator tells her to perform CPR to loosen the ligature. And she takes her hands and she unties the knots around her daughter's neck. And she proceeds to try to get her mouth to mouth. But her daughter is gone. Metro police respond quickly. You'll hear from the officers who first arrived and encountered this distraught family. You'll hear how they walked in and they saw this horrible scene. A beautiful little 12-year-old lying there discarded. Jocelyn and Johanna were like so many teenagers, or soon-to-be teenagers, and when they shared the room, it was like a tornado had hit it. I don't think that there was probably a piece of clothing in her drawer because it was all on the floor. I mean, it was, when you see the pictures, you'll see that there were just a couple of feet in the floors that you could walk without stepping on some piece of clothing or over hers or over some object. The whole section below the bed, the whole section beside the bed, and Johanna was lying on top of that cover from her bed, and all of her clothing and all the items there on the floor. So the Metro Police are up, and they're touched, and they secure the scene, and they call in people from youth services, they call in detectives from the location, they call in the Madison precinct detectives, their commanders that come out there. Everybody's putting their minds together. What can we do? What do we do? What investigative leads can we do? They throw all the resources and everything they can think of trying to solve the case of who killed John. The police basically hold onto the scene for almost a week. They have crime scene tape around it, and they assign 24/7 a police officer to stand there to guard the home so that they can go collect what they can find, what they can think of to test, to leave, then to come back and go back through another time, look and see. Literally, for a week, somebody was guarding that crime scene and that evidence. They did tower dumps to get cell phone information. They even sent in somebody who does a lot of computer type detective work to go in and to download the routers to see, because he learned at a conference, well, sometimes somebody's phones will hook up when they walk into a place, and you might be able to get something off the router if it's set up. It didn't lead to anything, but everybody was coming forward with every idea. They knocked on everyone's door. They canvassed everyone in the place. You'll hear about their encounters with various neighbors. And you'll hear that one of the neighbors that they encountered very early on and very often, who was very inquisitive and unusual, was the man that lived 2 trailers away. Roy Coons Jr. Roy Coons' father and stepmother lived in the trailer, and he lived primarily in the outshed beside the trailer. And one of the things that he told the police was the fact that, yes, he knew the family because he was the lawn man, and he would be paid monthly to come and cut their grass. He was just one of many people that the police talked to. He was just one of many people that the police looked at. But you'll hear from the first officers that dealt with them just about the unusual interactions. The police, they checked into, where were the nearby sex offenders living? Where was this person? They interviewed people. They checked out alibis on everything. They did tunnel vision on everything. They continued this investigation. You'll have the opportunity to hear the recorded encounters with Mr. Coons because the police officers were using recorders, but they didn't have body cameras at the time, but when they were canvassing witnesses and people, they had to take recording it. You'll get to hear that. You'll also hear how Detective Joshua Hill was one of the detectives who actually went and visited Mr. Coons at his parents' home and interviewed him, and that was recorded as well. And during that statement, you'll be able to hear Mr. Coons describe his activities and where he went and where he went. You'll hear things like the fact that he did live in the trailer park, that he did go to the family and cut their grass, that he was home that day, pretty much all day, that he had walked past the trailer, but he had not gone up to the trailer, that he had stopped to pick up a piece of paper out of the driveway. Well, I submit that you will hear from Detective Chad High that at 4:32 p.m. there was a call that came into Roy Coons Jr.'s phone, and it hit the cell tower, that would have the zone of coverage of the trailer park. But at 4:39, it was hitting a different sector of that cell tower. It was hitting more towards the area coming up Dickerson Pike, kind of in that direction towards Cedar Hill. And then there was another call that was at 5:13 that still showed being that other sector facing away from the trailer park. Then you will hear from Madge Green, someone that the defendant referred to by the name of Joe. And Madge Green also was a resident of the trailer park. Madge Green will tell you about jeopardy and the timing and about how sometime during the time of jeopardy between that 5 and 5:30 timeline, she'll give you the timeline on the double jeopardy question, but that Roy Coons Jr. came to her place and said that he had done some work, crawled up on top and had done some caulking to caulk up an area, and he was there to get paid for it. So she paid him, talked with him a few minutes, and then he left and says, yeah, I'm going to go walk my dog. Okay. He told her he had been at the trailer park all day. But you will hear that cell tower information that's not consistent with that. Now, we talked about how the scene was held, and there were several items of evidence. Tons of evidence was collected. And when you see the pictures, you will see how many pieces of clothing and cloth and shoes and things that are in that room and that were collected and tested. I ask for you to have patience during this trial. For us to present the evidence to you, you will need to hear from 3 different DNA experts, and I'll explain why. It may get tedious. It may get mathematical. It may get confusing. It may make you sleepy. Please pay attention. We are having to do this a little out of order instead of putting the DNA evidence at the end of the trial like we oftentimes will do, because we have an expert, Jennifer Horniak, who's coming in from another state, and she is only available tomorrow. Okay, she's only available tomorrow. She actually is leaving for her honeymoon, and so she has to come tomorrow afternoon. So we are actually kind of taking the pieces and telling the story in a different manner. She was actually the last DNA analyst to provide the results. So please bear that in mind when you're wondering, well, why are we hearing from her and not the others? You'll hear from her. Then you will hear from Rachel Mack, who is a forensic scientist, DNA expert from the Metro Crime Laboratory. And then you will hear from Charlie Castellabuano, who is a forensic scientist with the TBI, their crime laboratory. Now you're probably wondering, why are there so many different DNA analysts? That's because DNA is complex and there are different types of tests and different types of techniques. The first analysis was done by Rachel Mack, and Rachel Mack went through numerous pieces of evidence and tested it. Normally on a case, Metro Police, they test some of the evidence, but it's selected pieces because it's so time consuming and they have so many cases. But this case, they worked and worked and worked and worked and worked. There are different types of ways people can leave DNA behind. You have DNA in your saliva, you have DNA in your blood, and you have DNA on your skin cells, okay? Back in the olden days, it took a lot of evidence, a lot of blood, a lot in order to get DNA results. And as the years have progressed, the testing has gotten more and more and more and more sensitive. And that's a good thing. But it also leads to some unusual situations, such as this. when you have a female, a young girl, and you're looking to see, first of all, I'll put this out there. Her pants are pulled down, her panties are pulled down to her knees. Perhaps it's a blessing, but she was in the middle of her menstrual period, and she had a feminine hygiene pad. We'll never know, but perhaps that's what stopped penetration. But we will never know if she was or wasn't penetrated. We have no scientific evidence of semen or seminal fluid. So the police start looking for what's called trace DNA. Sometimes you hear it on TV. It's called touch DNA. And they look at where she's been touched and where she's been assaulted, and they go and they take swabs, Q-tips, and they swab the body in various places, sexual assault kits, and they take that. But when you think about it, when you swab an individual, you might get the person whose hands touched them, but you're also going to get the skin cells of the victim, right? You're picking up both of them because this test is so sensitive. So the issue that the Metro Crime Lab was having was you have a woman or young girl who has an X chromosome and an X chromosome, and then you're swabbing looking to see, do you have another woman or do you have another man's DNA on there? Well, in this case, what they found on many of their samples, not many, but some of their samples, was they had XX, or Johannes, and then they had XY, which would indicate a man, because men have an X and a Y. But with the testing that the TBI was using, that the Metro was using at the time, they had no ability to separate out and determine which of the three X's belonged with the Y. So there would be results called a mixed DNA result. So they couldn't do any identifying or matching. So that led for the request to be made of the TBI, because it used to be you had to send off to expensive private laboratories who were the only ones that did a technique called Y-STR testing. But the TBI had converted to that and had begun doing Y-STR testing. And what that is a different type of testing where in that mixture situation, okay, we don't know who the X's all belong to, but they had the technology to go in and pull out the Y chromosome, the male chromosome, because they know it doesn't belong to the victim. And then they do the testing just on that Y chromosome. So that's what you'll be hearing about from Ms. Castellbuona, and she will tell you about what she was able to tell. Now, when you have a full profile, an XX or an XY, you can tell a lot more. It can help you actually identify to a specific person. But when you have Y-STR testing, you can only identify to that parental line, okay? So it would be my co-counsel, Jeff George. He would share the same Y-STR as his son and as his father and as his paternal uncle. It goes through the male line, that Y. So the numbers and the statistics and the things that you hear on TV are a little bit different. It's not the population numbers that you hear when you have the full. But you'll hear about that. And what they do is they take it and they have a limited database because Y-STR has not been around as long. And it goes into, but they test what profiles they already have in these databases. And what they're looking for is to see how rare is this profile. Right? Is it a kind of a profile that pops up all over the place and it's in our database a lot? When the testing was done, Y-STR showed a DNA Y-STR profile on the right cheek, on the right buttocks, and on the left arm of Johanna's dead body. And it was the exact same Y-STR profile as Roy Coons Jr. And how rare is that profile? There were no other profiles of that type in the database. So now if the database is small, it'll hear numbers, you're like 28,000, but it's not, but you'll hear from them about the rarity of that profile. But it didn't stop there. Because one of the problems with that being able to tell the mixtures, and this is complex, and the experts will explain it to you, but I submit you'll hear from them that in much more detail, essentially the human ability to analyze the data of the profiles, they have to set maximum and minimum levels that they can consider when they're running all their probabilities and things that are math that are sometimes beyond me. But they are only able to actually analyze a part of the data. It just exceeds their human mental ability to do that. But there has become a new analytical process called true allele. And it is done through a lab called cybergenetics. And they don't actually do the chemical DNA analysis. What they do is they take the readings, the data that's been done by people like Ms. Mack, and then they do the computer analysis that runs the statistics, that runs the probabilities, that's able to do the analysis on the top end and on the bottom end, analyze all of the potential probabilities, and then come up with a result. She'll explain it better than I can. Please bear with us when we go through that. She will actually be the first DNA analyst that you'll be hearing from. Okay. And specifically, they looked at several pieces of evidence, but one in particular they looked at was from a swab from the inside of the window frame from the master bathroom. And what did that reveal? That revealed a mixture between Roy Coons Jr.'s DNA and Johanna Ortega's DNA. So why were they looking at the window? Why would they be caring about the window that's in the master bathroom? It's completely on the other end of the trailer. Okay? That's because one of the things the police discovered was on the far end of the trailer, opposite side from where Johanna was in her bedroom, the one that's next to the trees, up high, there are pry marks. And you'll see the pry marks, shiny little pry marks right on the outside of the window. Right where there's one of those old windows where you push the locks things in order to lift the lock up. And more than that, not only are there pry marks on the outside of the window, this bathroom was used, it was an in-use bathroom, but they also were like there's a ceiling fan on the floor, and they're kind of doing some storing some stuff in there. But one of the things that the detectives noticed was that window by the double sinks. Part of it had been taken out, one of the panes, and it had been put over into the sink, and somehow the curtain had been torn in a major portion right there at the window, and the shelves that were right there next to that window were crashed down on the ground. Somebody had come in or come out that window. You'll hear that they attempted to do fingerprints on the window, a really good surface to get prints. They couldn't get prints, though they could see where the fingers were, but they saw smudges, which could be consistent with gloves. But on that window, which obviously it had a person there, was where that cybergenetics DNA result showed that mixture. So, the police talked to Mr. Coons Jr. They talked to Mr. Coons Sr. They're investigating. They're in the process. They're getting a little bit of these results. They haven't got them all in. While all this testing is going on, Mr. Coons becomes pretty well aware that they're looking at him. What does he do? He packs up his stuff and he leaves. And he goes right over, kind of back over there behind the TA where there's a tree line and there's a homeless camp. And he gets a tent from one of the individuals there and he starts to live down in the homeless camp instead of living with his father. His father would come down there and bring him food and stuff. So while he's down there hiding out in the homeless camp, his neighbor in the tent next to him is an individual you'll meet by the name of Moses. Moses O'Connell. And Moses has met a girl who's down there, and you'll hear from her, and her name is Alexandra Hemingway. They now are a couple. They have a child, and they thankfully are living in an apartment now, gotten on their feet. But both of them are very religious people, kind of almost like street preacher type of people. They're known to be talking the walk, walking the walk and talking the talk. And they will come in here and they will tell you about their encounters with Mr. Coons. They'll tell you about some statements that he made to them. Questions such as, do you think God would forgive someone for killing someone? And then trying to convince them to leave with him and go to California. That he planned to do that as soon as he got his check. He was going to be gone. Wanted them to leave with him. And then the very eerie conversation where Roy Coons Jr., who they knew by the nickname of Ray, said, Moses, have you ever killed anybody? No. Well, I have. And that shit really sticks with you. Ladies and gentlemen, this may be a long and tedious and difficult trial. The evidence is disturbing. It is complex. It's many different pieces. I ask you, I beg you, on behalf of the family and the people of the state of Tennessee, please pay attention. Listen even when it's boring, even when it's technical, and take all the evidence that we have. And I submit that if you do, at the conclusion of this trial, you will convict Roy Coons Jr. of these heinous crimes.